Hey everyone, it's Kevin. Welcome back to the channel. So this is a recreation of a 2D piece that I made in 3D. I was on my website the other day looking at some of my old stuff and I stumbled across this poster. This was actually the first in a project series I did for fun back in 2016. Unfortunately, that first poster has since been taken and sold without my permission by numerous sellers. And I think it might have been a mix-up thinking it was official, and I'll get into that in this video. But at the time that I made it, I really liked how it turned out. I wanted to see what I could do with it in 3D, utilizing all of the skills I learned to mimic a 2D style. If you don't know what this is, it's a poster of the Disneyland attraction, It's a Small World. It's a slow-moving boat ride that's all about bringing the cultures of the world together, and it first debuted at the 1964 World's Fair and then moved over to Disneyland. Now it exists at almost every Disney theme park except for, I think, Shanghai. If you've never been to my channel before, or if you have been, I'm a huge Disneyland fan. Maybe not so much Disney, but I love Disneyland, the parks, and honestly theme parks in general. No matter what you feel about the company, I think Disney Parks and Imagineering's approach is to be able to create this world that transports you into whatever story that they're trying to tell. So whether that be going to a haunted mansion, or diving deep into the jungle on a jungle cruise, or going to space. As a kid, it was just super cool to be able to experience all of it and go on those adventures. And I think their approach to creating those worlds influenced how I approach my creative projects today. At the time that I made this, I was working at the company, but in a department called New Intellectual Property Development. We were working on things like Star Darlings and Palace Pets, if anyone knows what those are. But I hadn't really done a lot of personal projects in a long time, and I was thinking of doing something Disney themed, possibly like Disney parks related, and I thought of recreating the Disney attraction posters but in my style. The Disney attraction posters are pretty iconic because they're lining the entrances as you go into the park, and they serve as a really quick branding visual for what you can expect to experience. And I started with It's a Small World because, in my opinion, I think it's the one most recognized by its patterned and graphic design like exterior. And I think it has to do a lot with its artist Mary Blair, who is someone I really respect. Mary Blair was an artist that was very popular for her work with Disney in the 1940s to 1960s, and she worked on films like Cinderella and Alice in Wonderland. I really love her style because it's characterized by these unique color palettes and bold and organic shapes with whimsical themes, and her sense of design was so balanced and attractive to me. So I wanted to use that as a starting point and source of inspiration, but incorporate my own style using vibrant and contrasting color gradients and textures. So I made it in Adobe Illustrator, and honestly, it was so much fun to do something new. When I was done, I uploaded it to my website just to keep things up to date, and that was it. I guess someone had found my poster and posted it on Pinterest, which is fine because I know that's what it's used for. But I guess that pin had gotten popular because I noticed there was an influx of traffic to my website. And then I got some people emailing me, asking me if they could print it for some personal projects. I didn't really have plans to sell it or to print it. It was just for fun. But then I got another email telling me that someone was selling it on Etsy. So I go on Etsy, search It's a Small World, and lo and behold, I see it being sold as a print. But not only as a print, but as a t-shirt, on mugs, as a clock. And I didn't really know what to do because I didn't expect it to happen. There were two thoughts going on in my mind. The first was either the seller didn't realize it was fan art and thought it was a company official poster, or two, they knew it was fan art and decided to run with it anyway. Honestly, if it was a company official poster, I may have not cared as much because I don't really own it, but the fact that it was fan art just kind of made it weird. So shortly after this, I emailed the sellers and I emailed Etsy, but the sellers didn't get back to me, and Etsy wasn't very helpful. They kind of just said like, we're a marketplace, we can't really do anything about it. And basically it just came down to the fact that I don't own the IP. obviously Disney owns the IP to It's a Small World, and I had just created fan art, so there wasn't really anything I could do to defend this piece of fan art that I made. I know the file I uploaded wasn't good enough for printing, but I removed it anyway and ended up replacing it with a more low-res one. I did upload a black and white version to show some work in progress, but I think one of the sellers even went as far as recoloring it, resampling the colors from my original piece. Obviously, I could have probably pressed the issue more, but I honestly just didn't have the time or energy to keep going. And the reason why was because there were so many things happening at that time. So the first was that I was actually told shortly after making this that our team was going to be laid off. And if you want to learn the full story, you can check out my How to Deal with a Layoff video. But at Disney, there were a couple of efforts. This was prior to Disney Plus, but they were trying to start up different iterations of Disney streaming. So there was like an effort at ABC and then an effort at Disney Interactive. And then, we had our department, which is a content development department. And at the time, I think Maker Studios had just been acquisitioned. So they were trying to consolidate everyone into like one department. And that meant that we were most likely going to be impacted. And so our upper management was telling us to prepare, and it was going to be the second time I was going to be laid off. And I really wasn't sure like where I was going to go from this position. I had joined Disney because yes, I liked the company, but my ultimate goal was to get to Imagineering, and I really wanted to move over there for the next part of my career. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do that if I had to end up leaving the company. So if you don't know what Imagineering is, it's the creative arm of the Disney company that focuses on creating experiences for the parks, resorts, and products. Before, it used to just be the parks and everything experiential, but now it includes a little bit more. So I was trying to form connections, trying to create relationships in order to find opportunities over there. I also saw this as a way for me to change my role because although I liked design, I didn't really want to stay a designer for the rest of my career. I actually wanted to be more of a producer. I really liked working with people and trying to manage a project. I eventually did get to Imagineering, but that's a story for another time. The second was if I ended up getting laid off or I didn't get to Imagineering, what is it about Imagineering that I really liked? And that was themed and immersive entertainment. So I started trying to explore some external opportunities. I went to an escape room, really liked it, and I met the owner and ended up working with him because I really liked his approach to, creating an experience. I also worked with a themed entertainment company that did offerings for other theme parks. And then I worked as an art director for a gaming company just to see what that space was like. And my favorite was working with this immersive theater company called Delusion. I was doing some volunteer work with them because I had gone to their show for several years before that, but their show is honestly just like one of a kind. It's actually an immersive show that's like pretty intimate, but you go in groups of 10 and you're led through this experience with a cast, and you all have to do something in your group in order to progress the story along. So it's a very professional production, but I understand that, for some people it's very like out of the box and, not really something that they're used to. But I guess like, for example, the year that I was volunteering for it, it actually took place in this like warehouse in LA, but the experience started at this club and there was an actual event happening at the time. And so there was something about time travel, and we needed to find this man in a trench coat because he had some information about what was happening. And so, we're all in this club trying to find this guy, and we find him, and then he walks out and we have to follow him but not be seen by him. So we're like, closely following him, like hiding behind lampposts, hiding behind garbage cans. And then he goes into this warehouse, and then as soon as we follow him in, the experience begins. Like, it's very cinematic, and volunteering on that show was pretty awesome because just to see their approach to creating it, like, it's very conventional but also unconventional at the same time because there's so much that goes into it. So that was really fun. The third thing was I wanted to start my own company, and this was kind of the perfect opportunity to do so. So although I had like, hopes and dreams of moving over to Imagineering, I always had dreams of starting my own company. I had always been influenced by streaming streetwear. I love streetwear. I love like Stussy, and used to rock it a lot when I was like younger and in college. And I still, love that design influence now, although my style has changed kind of significantly. I still have an appreciation for it. But I always wanted to start my own clothing brand. And I understand that's kind of like a cliched thing to say because now everyone has one, especially with like the rise of drop shipping. But at the time, I felt like, it was a way for me to kind of like solidify my identity and what I liked creative wise. And so I started this company called Hunter, which was kind of based on like this hustle mentality. So it's a little bit interesting talking about it now. This is all in that how to deal with a layoff video, but it was kind of the first time that I had something represent me and my interests so publicly. At the time, I was really into tricking and parkour and being very active. And so I wanted to create a company that was based around that idea of like good energy, but at the same time have a very sensible, nice design aesthetic. And, being able to combine both of those worlds were like a dream for me. So it was all about like hunt what feeds you. And I had, animal totems and things that were very much themed around like Orion, the hunter from Greek mythology. I started off selling clothing and apparel, but then I wanted to make accessories and I started making these like handmade bracelets. And it wasn't until I started making those handmade paracord bracelets that like the company actually ended up like taking off somewhat. Like I remember because I was hand making them, like I could handle when I started like 5 to 10 orders in the beginning, but then I started getting a lot more. And I think it just got really overwhelming. Like it was really fun in the beginning, but I remember like every time I made a sale, I was like, okay, this is like getting a little too much. But like, it was really fun to start. And, that was like a really exciting time being able to, start thinking about a company. Taking all of this into consideration, the Small World fiasco was kind of at the bottom of the list and wasn't a top priority. I have checked to see if those sellers are still selling my piece, and some of them are, and now it's also on Redbubble. It's just kind of funny because when you compare my art versus like the actual original one, you can clearly see a difference. Like mine uses very bright, saturated colors, while the original either has a palette that was very contemporary for the time in the 1960s or something pastel. I don't really want to cause a fuss and I just want to move forward. So I also wanted to redo this piece to not really taint the memory of how I felt when I created the 2D version. So I just want to think of the 3D iteration and then move on from there. And so now I have like a complete Disney collection. I have the Haunted Mansion, I have the Matterhorn bobsleds, Tarzan's treehouse, and now it's a Small World. And this is probably going to be the last Disney themed one for a while. Hey everyone, just an update. So shortly after making this video, I decided to email those sellers about my art, and one of them actually got back to me on Etsy. So they said, "Hello, thank you for letting me know this. At this store, my friends and I cooperate and develop together, so there are things that are beyond our control. Sincerely sorry for this inconvenience. We will take it down, and if you still see any designs in our store, please send them so we can deactivate them. Thank you for contacting us." Upon reading this, I thought it was pretty baffling because you're not really cooperating or developing together if you don't know what you're putting up for sale. But then it dawned on me that this person is probably working alone, and mentioning other people was a way for them to shift the responsibility or the blame and distance themselves from the problem, probably all in an effort to avoid some sort of report or infraction from the platform. Their solution is to take it down, which is great and could be problem solved, but considering their response and how easy they made it seem to take down a listing, I'm one of many artists and this probably happens at a larger scale. So a bigger problem is that Etsy, being the widely used platform that it is, doesn't really do anything about it. And there's not a lot you can do if it happens to you. When I first started Hunter, I was selling on Etsy, but I think I didn't like their fees and I just moved to my own Shopify platform. But from what I've heard from friends that do still sell on Etsy, they've told me there are sellers that abuse the report function in order to discourage competition. So taking that into consideration, with the millions of listings on Etsy, I can understand why they would wash their hands of it and say, We're just a marketplace and they're not liable. Maybe this is another video entirely, so I'm sorry for the amount of rambling I've done here, but I used to see Etsy as the platform that championed the handcrafted, handmade creator. But now I feel like, and this is another thing, it's moving away from that. Maybe because the dropshipping bubble has burst on Amazon that they're all moving to Etsy. And if you don't know what dropshipping is, it's a fulfillment method where a business will sell things online without housing the inventory. So instead, when you make an order, the business will purchase that from a manufacturer and then they'll ship it to you directly. Which is why if you're shopping on Amazon, you might see the same item under numerous different names. When I was doing Hunter, this was just getting popular at the time because of Amazon FBA, which is fulfillment by Amazon. So they made it super easy to sell things from oven mitts to wine decanters to fly swatters. I remember people were just picking random products that had some sort of market cap because there is an app that identifies the search volume and can quantify metrics into demand. I know Amazon has combated this with private labeling like Amazon Basics and honestly raising their own listings in search. So I'm wondering if maybe because of that, those sellers and perhaps certain business practices are moving to Etsy. And they can just get away with it by posing as a small mom and pop shop or using the word handmade or handcrafted in their descriptions. Because of this, I know that it allows Etsy to sell more and make more money, but now it's just telling of the state of e-commerce. So I know this was long, but thanks for sitting through my little update and rant. I think what I'm gonna do is try emailing the rest of the sellers or report certain items and try to get those listings of my art taken down. If you sell products online or if this has happened to you, let me know in the comments. Anyways, just to break this down, I used Blender 3D, which is my 3D program of choice to create this. It combines 2D and 3D elements, with the 2D elements being created with grease pencil. If you don't know what grease pencil is, it's an object in Blender that allows you to draw and animate directly in the 3D viewport. This makes Blender ideal for 2D, 3D hybrid workflows. So to do this, I used my art as inspiration and started with modeling. Since I already had everything laid out for me, it was pretty easy to just kind of go with how I created the towers and just set up the composition. Obviously, since the poster was done in like a vertical format, I had to extend the sides, and that was just a matter of trying to recreate some of the design elements to fit the entire scene. So I kind of modeled the bigger things like the buildings and left out the smaller details since I was just going to create those with grease pencil. So I set up my camera and made sure that it worked with the angle that I was going for. I was roughly trying to just go with the same angle that I had in the poster, but it was a little bit difficult because this river that runs through the middle of the attraction isn't really in the right perspective. So I kind of had it going a little bit vertically, which is fine because it's a boat ride and it is on a track, so it works. So after I had modeled everything, I moved on to shading, which was really fun because I kind of just took all of my learnings from creating a textured toon shader and applied it here. Except in my most recent velocity piece, I figured out how to create a shader that used color attribute in order to apply colors in a way that made those gradients look dynamic. So in the original piece, I have the gradients not really going in a uniform way, and I really wanted to mimic that here for the buildings. I also added a grain on top of it just to give it a more 2D look and to have it reflect exactly what I was going for at the time. So here I kept the same color palette, going with really bright saturated colors and gradients, keeping up with, the magentas and the yellows and the greens, trying to keep it uniform but without looking like it was kind of a mess. When working with a lot of different colors, it's really easy to have it look like just vomit. So it was really important that I kind of kept the same value between all of them and made sure that, certain colors next to each other worked so that it just didn't look out of place and it looked cohesive. So after shading, I moved on to outlines, and this was a really interesting experiment because there's a few methods for creating outlines in Blender, and I usually use either inverted hull, geometry nodes, the grease pencil line art modifier, or freestyle. But this time around, I actually just used compositing, which was something I experimented with in a few of my typography pieces a few months ago. I had been trying to find separation lines or stroke lines in between the colors of a toon shader just to give a little bit more of a detailed look. And I finally figured out how to do that with a shader that I liked. So I did that here just to give the edges a bit more detail so it looked somewhat painted. After the outlines, I moved on to working with grease pencil, and this is where I started to finish off the buildings with those extra details. So I started making some of the more decorative elements like the face on the clock hands, some of these like star and sparkle ornaments all along the buildings. And it was really easy to do this with grease pencil because I could just place my cursor wherever I had a design element in the original reference, and then I could draw in 3D space directly where that element was supposed to be. Afterwards, I moved on to the background, adding a sky shader and then adding those buildings to give the piece some dimension. I just duplicated some of those foreground buildings and added a different shader on it and raised the color. For the boat, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I knew I wanted it to follow the river, but I wasn't sure if I was going to fill it with people or not. But I ended up just downloading some sitting models in Mixamo, which seemed like a quick and easy solution, and I added a toon shader on them to kind of replicate what I had done in the 2D version, and it seemed to work out. I then animated it with object constraints, and I also used geometry nodes in order to have this like water ripple effect as it traveled along the river. I did add some noise modifiers on the rotation in order to simulate it rocking back and forth as well. Now, the last few elements I added were some atmospheric effects, which is what I've been trying to push in my pieces. So I added some grease pencil elements to simulate some lights and watercolor textures in varying 3D space, and some star particles with geometry nodes. For the lights, I just had these different color gradients and placed them in different areas of the composition and set them to a different blending mode. And I also animated their opacity so that they would flicker in and out. For the watercolor elements, I just used the default texture brushes and placed a few of them in the foreground and sides of the composition in order to give it a dreamlike look. I did use vertex paint in order to manipulate the color, and I did create a few loose elements set with a different blending mode in order to give the buildings more of a textured look. If you want to learn more about this process, you can check out my treehouse or Phoenix breakdown, and I'll leave links to them below. And the last thing was creating these particles in geometry nodes. This was just a simple grid array with random values, and I've been trying to get back into geometry nodes, so I'm trying to incorporate them a lot more into my pieces. To finish this off, I did check bloom and added some compositing glare nodes in order to intensify some of the colors and lights in the scene. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I really hope you enjoyed that story and the breakdown of this piece. If you want to learn more about my process and about grease pencil, you can actually check out my course, Magic Storybook, at cgboost.com. In it, I'll walk through everything you need to know to get started with grease pencil, and we'll end up exploring techniques to create vibrant 2.5D scenes that move from beyond the flat page into dimensional space. Don't worry if you're not a drawing pro or are new to 3D, this course is totally beginner friendly. There's over 10 hours of content, downloadable project files, and access to help anytime you need it. Anyways, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thanks again, and see you guys next time.